I'm sure everyone listening here knows about the Chernobyl nuclear power plant accident. The Ukrainian town is still contaminated with tons of radioactive minerals and was probably the most famous nuclear disaster ever to have occurred. But what caused this catastrophe? Could it have been prevented? And what did it result in? Today I'm going to be explaining everything you need to know about this devastating disaster. The Chernobyl accident began on the 26th of April 1986. It is difficult to say who was fully responsible, but there were a few clear factors that played a major role. On the day that the reactor should have had its maintenance checks, the authorities decided to do them during the night, so that there was no power shortage. Since most experts worked during the day, the people responsible for checking the reactors were much younger and less experienced. While the test responsible for checking how well the cooling pumps were working was carried out, with the reactor working at 25% of its maximum capacity, something went wrong, and its energy dropped to 1%. Instead of turning off the reactor completely, as most of the engineers would have advised, the test was continued. Suddenly, the energy rose up to 100%. The temperature started rising and falling, with the entire building shaking. The pumps failed, and the reactor started making loud noises. The pressure grew and grew until the 1,000-ton lid of the reactor was lifted and the reactor exploded, leaking radiation outside into the surroundings. Another explosion then followed, with the reactor completely being destroyed. It was caused by the water from the cooling pumps that turned into hydrogen and oxygen, which immediately combusted, creating an even bigger explosion than the first one. And things were going to get worse, much worse in fact. Right under the Chernobyl power plant, there was a giant underground lake that was usually used for cooling purposes. Since the reactors were starting to overheat, the barrier blocking the reactors from the lake was melting away. And if the lake wasn't dried out, an explosion 300 times larger than the atomic one in Nagasaki and Hiroshima would happen. Many people died trying to empty the lake because of the immense radiation there. But in the end, 3 men managed to swim under the station, through the water contaminated with tons of uranium, and turned the lever that emptied the lake. One of these 3 men died soon from radiation poisoning, but the valve was opened and the lake dried out. A third explosion was prevented, but the reactors were still burning and releasing radiation. Next morning, life continued as normal. Children went to school, played on playgrounds, and walked on the streets, even though they were now all filled with water. The people who lived there didn't know anything about the radiation leak, apart from the fact that a white substance formed at the surface of the water. We now know that was uranium. But even though the citizens of Chernobyl didn't know about the radiation, it was still there. That day, in a nuclear reactor in Sweden, approximately 3,000 kilometers away from Chernobyl, the workers of their power plant found the level of radiation to be unusually high. They searched every reactor, but not a single leak was found. They soon published this in the news, and it was quickly figured out where the radiation was coming from. The entire city of Chernobyl was immediately evacuated, but over 4,000 people soon died of cancer because of the high radiation exposure, with many more deaths to come. Chernobyl was a tremendous disaster, resulting fully from human error. And when it was just built, it was considered the latest advancements in science. Nuclear power plants may be highly effective, I agree, but they do have a dangerous side to them, so they need to have regular checks and lots of professionals. Surely a temporary power shortage would have been much better, wouldn't it? We should all hope that in the future, people will think about what the results of their actions would be before they do the actions themselves.